So I'm curious how that self-awareness was showing up and how much you attribute it to yoga and meditation, or you can separate those or keep them together, and the 12-step work and what you're doing in your time as social worker and that educational study and your own self-study. So, I mean, it just seems like I've known people that have been in recovery and kind of went about their lives as it was almost, when they're drinking, same career, same path, and maybe deepen their spirituality through a church or a community. And then I've known people that got in recovery much like you did and found yoga early on. And then the two ran almost a parallel track. And then like I kind of did it backwards. I got sober, then through the 11th step found meditation and had been in 20 years clean, sober, meditating, and had a lot of physicality in my daily life. And then I found yoga in the early 2000s as that crest of that wave you started riding earlier swept through the Midwest. And so anyway, self-awareness, what do you really attribute that to?
Well, I think it starts, if you are able to get sober, if you survive your addiction to the point where you have the opportunity to be sober, you've learned something very important, which is that you have a part to play in both creating suffering in your life and creating well-being. Like that is on you. You leave rehab and you realize, well, I left rehab, I was 2 months sober. And so I had a chance to live or a chance to die. And that was on me. And so I think that in and of itself was a huge blessing, that the role I was going to play in my happiness or my suffering was writ large. There was no one to blame for my success or failure. No one was going to drink for me. I was going to have to, if I was going to drink and die, that was going to be on me. If I was going to be sober and free, that was going to be on me. And so I think that has to happen for people. It's one way or the other. A lot of times it's like cancer or divorce. There's some fracture in your life which makes you really look at the role that you're playing in the quality of your experience. And then, I was really fortunate to be, so that's right off the bat kind of creates some self-awareness. Like, wow, I'm the driver here of the quality of my experience. And then, the 12-step programs are this huge culture of personal responsibility and self-awareness, and kind of the role models are people who are willing to own the part they play in their lives and the interactions with you. There's a rigor around knowing when you were wrong and promptly admitting it, going back and making amends if you've caused harm. There's it's a culture of almost joyous personal responsibility and, a faith in the human courage, the courage it takes to change your life and to love well. And so all of that was like dialed into me by a 12-step program. So the yoga stuff was, I was ready to go. I was like cable ready. Yoga came in now where yoga came in was to take that same inquiry that was happening, and like an example of like an inquiry of a 12-step program is it's mostly external, right? I'm going to work and I'm in resentment towards my boss. And I'm like, how do I change that? Well, I can pray for my boss and I can try to change my behavior to have a different outcome. I get on a yoga mat and I'm in a pose and there's a lot of discomfort. And instead of like praying for my boss, I bring my awareness into into my musculoskeletal system. And I see like, why am I working across purposes here? What's going on? And I see myself, I'm trying to prove something with this pose, or I'm just asleep at the wheel in this portion of my body. There's no awareness going on here. Or there's no effort. I'm being lazy over here, or I'm working too hard over here. I'm not working hard enough over there. And so that self-inquiry goes into the musculoskeletal system, into the cardiovascular system, how you're breathing and how you're moving, with the poses. And that's like its own thing, because then like one of the things I said to my students is that when I started doing yoga, my couch became more comfortable, because all of this tension that I've been carrying around all my life that was holding me apart from the couch, I was starting to let go of. And I could get more ease from my couch. The couch didn't change, I did. And then in meditation, so now you have this, so in AA or 12-step programs, you're starting to like, how do I be with my boss differently? How do I be with my friends differently? And then in yoga, you're like, how do I be with my body differently? How do I be with the breath differently? And then in meditation, you're starting to bring that same inquiry into the habits of your mind. And you're starting to look at an example of a meditation inquiry is like, how do I respond when I find something pleasant? And how do I respond when I find something unpleasant? What goes through my head and what goes through my heart and what goes through my body when something's pleasant? And what happens when something is unpleasant? And, what are these habitual states like? What is it like to want something? What is it like to not want something? What goes through, what changes, what physiological changes take place when I'm craving something or not wanting something? And so this is the meditation inquiry. So there's like kind of almost leveled in. And in every step of the way, I've had what's been modeled for me is people who are committed, to these inquiries that care. If you're in a 12-step program, people care about the inquiry of a 12-step program. If you're your yoga teachers are like committed to like knowing. Iyengar famously said, if you don't know your left little toe, how can you know yourself? This is the inquiry into the body and the breath. He was committed to like really knowing. Like for me, it's like, I don't know, I'm not here unless I know how my feet are on the ground and how my skeletal system is balanced over my center of gravity and, how my breathing is going. I want to know my physiology from the feet up, and I want to know the breath from beginning to end. And that's like all the time.
Right.
And the same is true of where is my attention divided or undivided, and if it's regardless, where is it? Where am I placing my attention? And so those are all trainings that net out over time, and I've had a lot of time.
Yeah. Well, that's very inspirational. And I'm sure we have listeners from all over the world in the yoga community and the recovery community as well that will glean a lot of little pearls of wisdom from your experience. And that, I really appreciate you sharing that. So we were mentioning Brewer's book, but I'd like to touch a little bit before we start wrapping up on your books. I mean, Meditations from the Mat was your launch into the publishing, being an author. And then I know your most recent book, Daily Reflections on Addiction, Yoga, and Getting Well. And then you had the Intentions in Being book. And just, you want to talk a little bit about those books that you've got so our listeners can hear what inspired you?
When I went to rehab, there was a little black book that was a daily reflections book. And, it's 6 weeks and we're all like military. The rehab I went to was for kind of higher ranking NCOs, non-commissioned officers, and lower ranking officers. So we were all kind of the same age, same level of experience in the military, and going through rehab. And there was a pretty strong sense of community and friendship among both the staff and the clients, the people going through treatment and the people who were working there. And so we were always throughout the day in these conversations. And one of the things we were talking about every day was what we read that day in our daily reflections book. And it was a way to kind of reflect on the principles of sobriety and talk about them with others and then try to live them one day at a time. And so I came into the yoga space and there was just like these academic tomes and then nothing in between. So you could either read something that, like a college text, like really more like a master's level, theological textbook, or you could just skip it all together and just do poses. And so I wanted something for yoga people that was more like an in-between thing The other thing is that in the 90s, it was a great kind of a heyday of self-help, and there were some great authors. And I bought a lot of good books and read about a third of them. And I had all these great books on my shelf that I read a third of. I never finished these books. And there's something kind of disappointing about buying a book that you're really excited about and reading what you can and getting a lot out of it, but feeling like you've kind of failed and you're kind of a lightweight for not finishing these books. And so I wanted to give people the experience I had of the Daily Reflections book. I also wanted to give people something that, what was happening with these books that I read a third of is that you read something that's really impacting you. You got to put the book down and feel for a while. And then you got to spend a couple of days or months or years thinking about what you just read. It's not like you can, it's not a page turner. You know, someone says something. I remember Stephen Covey said, how you see the problem is the problem in 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. And that changed my life, you know?
Yeah.
That just changed my life. And I had to really, you know, I'm still pondering that quote. And so these books, you know, and so I wanted to give a book to people that they could pick up and just read a little bit and think about it for a month and then be comfortable going back and picking up some more. I wanted to give them a daily reflection. So a lot of that first book was as a result of those first 10 years of recovery where, you know, I was the reader. You know, I was the person I was writing for. I had, you know, new to yoga. I had all, you know, I had an interest in learning, but I had a low attention span or whatever. And so that Daily Reflections book for Meditation to Mac came out, and it was just really to give, you know, this new wave of yoga people a way to know what yoga is. The other thing was that yoga was spreading as an exercise system, and I wanted to support people in integrating not just the exercise, but not just the physical, but the metaphysical aspects of yoga into what they're doing on their mats to make their time on their mat more meaningful.
Right.
And so that's what the first book was. And then about 10 years later, I was like, people ought to meditate, you know? And so I wrote Intention of Being as for the same reason as like Meditations from the Mat has a picture of the mat on the cover, and it was to welcome people into the yoga mat. And then Intention of Being has a picture of a meditation cushion. It's kind of to welcome people onto the meditation cushion. And then this last book on recovery was kind of a no-brainer because by the time I wrote it, I think I was, you know, 26, 27 years sober and a yoga teacher. And so, you know, people have been asking me to do it for a while. And it was kind of a no-brainer to write a book about, you know, specifically the paths that I've walked. So it's a book about 12-step programs, about Buddhist meditation and teachings, and the traditional sutras of yoga of Patanjali. And so I take a concept. So in that book, I take a concept like, you know, wise effort or like a full effort, and, you know, look at, you know, spend 10 essays on like how did the 12-step program, the founders of the 12-step programs, you know, suggest that what quality of effort do we put into our recovery? And then I looked at, you know, at the teachings of the Buddha, like how did the Buddha describe full effort? You know, what level of effort do we put into meditation? And then what did Patanjali say around what level of effort do we put into our yoga? And just to look at how these three traditions from very different moments, you know, and, you know, backgrounds or whatever, how they speak to these. There's just a few really central issues going on in any spiritual practice. And I wanted to, you know, one is your attitude, you know, one is your effort, you know, one is your attention, you know, if you, and then there's the qualities of the heart. There's kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And so there's just not a lot of moving parts really in a human life. And I wanted to look at how did each of these traditions talk to these kind of decisive venues in our life, like the quality the quality of heart that I bring to my life is decisive. You know, the quality of effort that I bring to my life is decisive. The attitude that I bring to my life is decisive. And what do these traditions say? What guidance can I get from them? And then making that available to someone in early recovery. And so that was the purpose of the third book.
Oh, very good. Well, very good. Well, I'll make sure I'll list those books in the podcast notes.